Paper 1 writing, which is the short story. It's an hour and 45-minute exam. You've got an hour for the reading, 45 minutes for your short story. Give yourself an extra half an hour if you have extra time. The word count is 450 to 550. I would go for 500. And the idea is you should have a draft in your head going into the exam. You're not going to remember the whole thing, but at the minimum, have a beginning, middle, and end that you might have an idea of what kind of story you're going to do. That's the word count. That's within the word count. Here's an example. So like I say, you get 4 titles, but if you have an idea in your head, if you look at the couple of story titles I've got here that I'm sort of swapping between, I think you could do any story really and pick the closest title. I wouldn't pick I wouldn't do a new story on the day of the exam. So essential things then, 450 to 500 words. Do a beginning, middle, and end plan at the top of the page. You will get a mark. Set your story over a few minutes. Focus on one main event. Past tense I would do. A clear beginning, middle, and end. Interesting opening, closing line. Use sensory language. Start with the action straight away. I don't need a paragraph about what the weather's like. And check for errors at the end of the exam. Like I say, you've only got 45 minutes. You can't do anything too sprawling. So I would describe an exciting 5 minutes of your main character's life. At the minimum, going to the exam, try to come up with a beginning, middle, and end. A memorable opening line and a memorable closing line. Show, don't tell. So don't try to write sentences like the man was tired. Instead, put the man yawned as he looked at his watch. Instead of the man was angry, the blood rushed to the man's face. So the idea is show me physically instead of telling me. Okay, here's a couple of good plans. You will get a mark for your exam. So nice and simple, beginning, middle, and end. Put this at the top of your exam paper, question paper. Example opening sentences. We want to give a good first impression and last impression to the examiner. So you could either use a rhetorical question or a memorable statement, so a real statement that stands out. For a successful story, try to include the following: occasional short sentences for effect, sensory language, strong verbs, and figurative language. So short sentences, the idea is if you want to quicken the pace of your story, using short sentences will rack up the tension. Sensory language is probably the one I would use the most. The idea is you give a real feel to the reader that they imagine themselves there. So we all know what the sound of glass sounds like when it shatters. We all know what the smell of, bacon smells like. It puts the reader right into the scene. Here's some examples of sensory language. Pause if you need to. And try not to use adverbs in a boring verb. So instead of he ran quickly across the battlefield, get rid of the adverb and change the verb to make it stronger. So for example, he raced across the battlefield. He sprinted across the battlefield. He dashed across the battlefield. All of these are better than he ran quickly. Figurative language, so if you're confident, try to use it. You wouldn't want to use lots and lots of it, but maybe one simile or one personification in your story would be great. Shows the examiner you know what you're doing. And here is an example of them all together. So the idea is all the way through, you have short sentences, sensory language, strong verbs, and figurative language. The main thing from punctuation is sort of capital letters, apostrophes, and all that. But the main thing my students struggle with is run-on sentences. This is where you have 2 sentences together with either no punctuation or wrong punctuation. The most common example would be a comma. So instead, really proofread your work and either use a connective like so or because, or use a full stop. Do not just shove in a comma. Okay, here's a typical example. This would be like a grade 3 paragraph for the person who used commas or no punctuation, while here they used a full stop with a connective. So that would go from a grade 3 to a grade 5 paragraph.